I never thought of myself as someone who could be unfaithful. Not really. Sure, there were years, especially as I slid into my 50s, when I imagined what it might feel like to be wanted again, to be touched like I was something precious and not just part of the furniture. But daydreams are safe. They don't hurt anyone. They're the little indulgences we allow ourselves to survive the ordinary. It all began on a hot Thursday in July, the kind of day when the air in the suburbs hangs heavy and time seems to wilt on the vine. My husband, Richard, was in the garage fiddling with tools he never actually used, and I was upstairs rearranging the guest room for company. Company I hadn't seen in 20 years. "Do you need help with anything?" Richard called from below, his voice muffled and half-hearted. He was more married to his routine than he was to me these days. "I've seen," I called back, fluffing the pillows and opening the window to let in some breeze. The guest room smelled like stale linen and lemon polish, comforting in a way, like the memory of something long gone. The visitor was Matthew, my stepbrother. Or, rather, my mother's second husband's son. We were never close, not really. When our parents married, I was 26 and already living on my own. He was 23 and fresh out of some messy breakup, quiet and unpredictable in the way that made people keep their distance. But I remembered him. Vividly. Maybe too vividly. We hadn't spoken in years, no fallout, no drama, just life and time doing what they always do. Then, out of the blue, 3 weeks ago, I got an email from him. "I'll be driving through your area. Any chance you'd be up for letting an old stepbrother crash for a night or two?" Something in me replied almost instantly, and something deeper didn't tell Richard until the day before Matthew arrived. He pulled up in a black Jeep, dust-covered, and humming like it had stories to tell. He got out slowly, stretching his arms over his head, the afternoon sun cutting across his jaw and neck like it was sculpting him fresh out of stone. My breath caught when I saw him. He looked grown. Not just older. He was that, with silver dusting his temples and tiny creases at the corners of his mouth, but there was a kind of weight to him now. Like he'd been through things. His eyes, that same pale green the first remembered, didn't dart around like they used to. They settled calmly on me. "Hey, Anna," he said, with a crooked smile that hadn't changed one bit. "Matthew." I stepped out from the porch and walked toward him, arms open in a hesitant hug. When we embraced, it wasn't stiff or awkward. It was warm. A little too warm. His chest pressed against mine just long enough to remind me that I'd gone without certain kinds of touch for far too long. "Thanks for letting me stay," he said, grabbing his duffel bag. "I hope it's not a bother." "Not at all. We've got plenty of room. And Richard will be happy to have another man around. He gets sick of my cooking critiques." Matthew chuckled. "I can handle critiques. Not sure I can handle Richard, though." I gave him a sideways look. Still the same sharp tongue, I see. He smiled wider, but didn't apologize. That evening passed harmlessly enough. Richard grilled on the back patio, overcooked the steaks as usual, and Matthew told us about his recent freelance photography work, mostly architectural shoots, some travel pieces. He had a way of speaking that felt intimate even in a group. He looked at me more than he looked at Richard. I noticed, and I didn't look away. Later, when the dishes were done and Richard had wandered off to his recliner for his evening dose of historical documentaries, read, televised snoring, I found Matthew on the back porch, staring out over our tiny fenced yard. "Still hot out," I said, stepping next to him. He was barefoot, leaning against the railing with a bottle of beer in his hand. "Yeah. I can't believe how quiet it is here," he murmured. "You ever just sit out here at night?" "Sometimes. When I can't sleep. Or when I want to feel like my life is still mine." He glanced at me then, his expression softening. "That's an interesting thing to say." "Well," I sighed. Sitting on the porch swing, sometimes being married this long feels like a gentle kind of disappearing. He sat next to me, not too close, not too far. "I get that," he said. "I've been with people who made me feel like furniture. Then I started being alone. That wasn't any better." The porch creaked as we rocked slowly. The silence between us was charged now, a current starting to hum beneath the politeness. I looked at him in the dark, his profile illuminated by the string lights along the edge of the patio, and wondered what it would feel like to kiss someone who remembered me young, but didn't know me married. Someone who wasn't part of the slow erosion of intimacy I lived with every day. "You've aged well," he said, his voice low. "Excuse me? You're even more beautiful now than I remember. You were always sharp, like a knife in velvet. But now, I don't know. You feel settled, like a storm I wouldn't mind chasing." I laughed softly, a little stunned. "You're not supposed to say things like that to your stepsister. We're not really siblings, Anna." That sentence sat between us for several seconds. The way he said my name felt heavier than it should have. I didn't reply. I couldn't. That night, as I undressed in the master bathroom and climbed into bed beside Richard's snoring body, I felt charged. Matthew had said nothing overtly indecent, and yet I was lit from the inside out, my skin awake in ways it hadn't been in years. I lay on my side, staring at the wall, my breath shallow, my thighs pressed tightly together. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up thirsty and wandered down the hall in my robe. I had barely reached the kitchen when I heard a sound from the guest room. Just a click. A door hinge. I paused, turning slightly, and then I saw him in the hallway. Matthew, shirtless, in low-slung pajama pants, his body leaner than I expected, but strong, like it had been forged by something other than gym vanity. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me. I knew I should walk away, but I didn't. Instead, I tilted my head toward the kitchen and whispered, "Couldn't sleep either?" He followed. The light from the refrigerator washed the room in a ghostly blue as I poured us both water. We stood barefoot on the tile floor, and everything about the space between us felt electric. "Anna," he said, voice hoarse, "don't take this the wrong way, but if you weren't married, I would have kissed you the minute I got out of that Jeep." I stared at him, heart pounding. "Then let's pretend I'm not married. Just for a second." I don't know why I said it, but he stepped forward, and I didn't stop him. The way Matthew kissed me wasn't rushed or desperate. There was no clumsy fumbling or wild grabbing. It was slow, confident. His hand slid to the side of my face like he'd been dreaming about it and wanted to savor the moment. His lips were warm, slightly dry, and still he tasted like heat and beer and something I couldn't name. I didn't pull away, even as my mind screamed that I should. Even as my bare legs began to tremble from standing so close to his nearly naked body in my kitchen, while my husband snored just 20 feet away, I kissed him back. When his other hand found the curve of my waist through the robe, I gasped softly into his mouth, and everything shifted. I stepped back. "We shouldn't," I whispered. My breath came fast. My pulse beat like a drum in my throat. "I know," he said, licking his lips, eyes heavy with something between guilt and desire.
"I'm sorry."
That wasn't fair of me. "No," I replied, voice trembling. "It wasn't," but I let it happen. We stood there in the kitchen silence, both caught in that strange limbo between right and wrong, where everything still feels coded in possibility. Then I turned and walked back to the bedroom. I didn't sleep. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling fan as it sliced through the darkness above us. Richard shifted once beside me, murmured something incoherent, and pulled the sheet up over his belly. I watched him, wondering if he even noticed me anymore, if he saw the shape of my back or heard the soft sounds I made when I dreamed. The next morning passed in a blur. I cooked eggs and toast. Richard read the paper. Matthew emerged from the guest room looking rumpled and freshly showered. We didn't speak of what happened, but we both knew it hung in the air between us like humidity, thick and pressing. I avoided being alone with him. I busied myself with chores, invented errands to run, and insisted that Richard take Matthew into town to show him the new sports store that opened near the plaza. When they returned hours later, I was in the garden, sweat glistening between my breasts, deliberately filthy and unreachable. It worked, for a while. But that night, after Richard fell asleep with the TV humming in the background, I heard a soft knock on the guest room door. My hand froze on the faucet in the bathroom sink. I shouldn't even think about it. but I padded down the hallway like a sleepwalker and knocked once in return. He opened the door without a word, and I slipped inside. The room smelled like cedar and cologne. Familiar. He was shirtless again, sitting at the edge of the bed with a look in his eyes that made my whole body tense. "We're not doing anything," I said immediately. "This is just talking. We need to talk." He nodded. "Okay." I sat in the chair near the window, clutching the edges of my robe like armor. "What are we doing, Matthew?" "I don't know, but I can't stop thinking about you." "That's not an answer. It's the only honest one I've got." I shook my head, trying to steel myself. This isn't some harmless flirtation anymore. That kiss last night was real. His voice cut through my protests. He stood and crossed the room in 2 steps, kneeling in front of me. His hands rested lightly on my thighs over the robe. "Tell me to stop and I will," he whispered. "But don't lie to me and say you didn't feel it too." I opened my mouth to say something. Anything. But my voice failed me. My chest rose and fell in sharp, uneven breaths. His lips brushed my knee, then the inside of my thigh, slowly, reverently, like I was something holy. I should have pushed him away. Should have fled the room. Instead, my knees parted. I watched as he untied the robe's belt with shaking fingers, his eyes locked on mine. I wasn't wearing anything underneath. I hadn't planned that, it was simply how I slept. But now it felt like an unspoken invitation. His mouth found my skin again, higher this time, and I exhaled a sound I hadn't made in years. I didn't feel like a wife in that moment. I felt like a woman. His hands were gentle but sure. His mouth was insistent, moving lower until I couldn't think straight, couldn't hold back the moan that escaped me as my head fell back against the wall. I clutched the chair's arms, my body arching toward him as if pulled by invisible strings. I was being unraveled, worshipped. It was more than lust. It was something aching and deep, a hunger that had lived in me so long it had grown roots. I came quietly, breathlessly, my thighs trembling around his shoulders. Afterward, I curled into him on the bed, both of us speechless. My robe was open, forgotten. His skin was hot against mine. We didn't say anything for a long time. "I should go back to my room," I finally whispered. He didn't reply. He just stroked my hair like he was afraid I'd disappear if he stopped. I slipped out quietly a few minutes later, padding barefoot down the hall. Richard hadn't moved. The sheets hadn't shifted. I slid into bed and stared at the ceiling again, this time with my body still singing from what had just happened. I didn't feel guilty. Not yet. The next morning, Matthew was gone. His bed was made. His bag was packed. A note sat on the kitchen counter. "Had to get on the road early. Thank you for everything. Please tell Richard goodbye for me. M." I stood there holding the note, heart pounding in my chest, wondering if I'd imagined it all. The kiss. The touch. The way he made me feel like I was still made of fire, and not just dust. I knew I'd hear from him again. I just didn't know when. But I also knew something had changed in me. Something that couldn't be undone. For days after Matthew left, I moved like someone learning how to live inside her skin again. Everything I did felt louder, more tactile. The cling of my clothes, the drag of the vacuum hose across the floor, the butter melting on toast. It was as if my senses had been shocked awake. Richard, of course, didn't notice. He carried on with his crossword puzzles and lawn schedules like nothing had changed. And I suppose for him nothing had. But I couldn't look at my own reflection without remembering Matthew's hands on my thighs, his mouth worshipping a body I'd stopped believing was desirable years ago. It wasn't just the act, it was the way he'd looked at me. Like I mattered. Like I was still alive. The ache didn't go away. Not with time. Not with distraction. In fact, it grew. A week passed. Then another. I checked my email obsessively, hoping for a message from him. Nothing. I thought maybe he'd regretted it. Maybe it had just been a stolen moment for him, a fantasy scratched before moving on. But then on a Wednesday morning, I opened my inbox, and there it was. A subject line that simply read, "Still thinking about you." My stomach flipped. I clicked. Anna. I told myself I wouldn't write. that I'd leave it alone, let it be this beautiful, forbidden thing we shared, and walk away like a good man should. But I can't stop thinking about you, about how you tasted, about the sounds you made, and more than that, about how your eyes looked when you were letting yourself feel again. I don't know what we're doing, or if we should do anything, but I had to tell you, it wasn't just a one-time thing for me. I'll be in Chicago next weekend, just for one night. I'll be staying at the Palmer House downtown, room 917.
No expectations.
But if you come, I won't stop you. I read it 3 times. Then I sat in the kitchen, holding my coffee, my hands trembling. Richard came in, kissed the top of my head without looking at me, and grabbed his thermos before heading to the garage. When the door shut, I opened the email again. Chicago was only a 2-hour drive. That Friday, I told Richard the first was going to visit an old college friend, Elaine, who had recently moved back into the city. It wasn't a complete lie. Elaine did live there, and she would absolutely cover for me if asked. But I hadn't seen her in over a year. I packed light, just a dress, one that hugged my hips more than I usually allowed, silk underwear, the red lipstick I only wore on anniversaries we never celebrated properly anymore. I told myself it was only dinner,
Just a talk.
but I knew better. The Palmer House felt like walking into a different life. Ornate chandeliers, velvet accents, the kind of place people went to reinvent themselves. I stood outside room 917 for a full minute before I knocked. The door opened almost immediately. Matthew stood there, barefoot in dark jeans and a black t-shirt, as if he'd been pacing for hours. His eyes swept over me slowly, drinking me in. I saw the moment his gaze paused on the low neckline of my dress, and a shiver ran through me. "You came," he said, voice husky. "I shouldn't have," I replied. "But you did." He stepped aside. I walked in. The room was dim, warm, smelling faintly of leather and clean linen. Jazz played softly from a Bluetooth speaker in the corner. He closed the door behind us. Neither of us moved for a moment. Then he crossed the room and kissed me like he was claiming something. This wasn't the slow, tentative kiss from my kitchen. This was different.
Hungry. Sure.
His hands were in my hair, on my waist, pulling me against him. I moaned into his mouth, the sound bursting out of me like something primal. He lifted me, just lifted me as if I weighed nothing, and set me down gently on the bed. "Do you know how many nights I've thought about this?" he whispered, his lips brushing the line of my jaw. "How many times I've replayed that night?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My dress slid off like it had been waiting for this moment its whole life. He looked at me like he wanted to memorize every inch. His hands found the curve of my waist, the softness of my belly, the parts of me I had grown ashamed of. But he worshipped them. He made them sacred. He undressed slowly, deliberately, letting me watch as the muscles of his chest, his stomach, his thighs were revealed to me one by one. When he joined me on the bed, I wasn't thinking about right or wrong anymore. I was only thinking about how deeply I wanted to feel everything he gave me. He kissed every part of me like a man starving. We moved together in a rhythm that felt ancient, inevitable. My body responded to him like it had been waiting for this touch for decades. I gasped his name when he entered me, my nails digging into his back. I clung to him like he was air. The way he made love to me wasn't just physical. It was emotional, reverent, like he was giving me back pieces of myself I hadn't realized were missing. When it was over, we lay tangled in sheets that smelled like sweat and redemption. "You scare me," I whispered, tracing the line of his collarbone with my fingers. "Why?" "Because I can't pretend this doesn't matter." He took my hand and pressed it to his chest. "Then don't pretend." I wanted to stay there forever, wrapped in warmth, my skin still humming with sensation. But the clock ticked forward, and reality waited just outside that hotel door. By Sunday evening, I was back home. Richard never asked about my trip, just grunted from his recliner as I brought in the mail and folded laundry. I watched him, wondering if he ever noticed the way I'd stopped being his, or if he ever really noticed me at all. I told myself that night in Chicago was the end, that I'd gotten it out of my system. that I'd return to my marriage and play my part. But the body doesn't lie. And neither does the heart. 2 weeks later, Matthew texted, "I'm heading to Madison for a shoot. Wanna meet me halfway?" My fingers hovered over the phone screen. I typed back, "Yes." I met Matthew at a roadside inn just outside Rockford. It was raining, heavy, silver droplets pounding the windshield as I pulled into the narrow parking lot, my hands trembling slightly on the wheel. The motel was nothing like the Palmer House. Cheap carpet, humming vending machines, a flickering neon sign that stuttered vacancy, like it was unsure of itself. But it didn't matter. The moment he opened the door to room 204 and pulled me inside, the setting vanished. I didn't care about the smell of old cigarette smoke or the creak of the floor under our feet. I cared about the way his hands moved across my back, sliding beneath my sweater like he already knew what I needed. I cared about how quickly my body responded, traitorous and eager, like it had been waiting in stasis since Chicago. I cared about the way he looked at me, like I was the only real thing left in his world. That night, we didn't speak much. There was nothing casual about it anymore.
No hesitation.
No pretending this was just some impulse we were scratching. We undressed each other slowly, like we were unwrapping something sacred. His fingers slid beneath my bra strap, and he kissed the top of my shoulder with a tenderness that made my throat tighten. My pants hit the floor with a soft sound, and I stood before him in nothing but pale pink lace and a pulse that throbbed everywhere. He stepped back just a little and looked at me. Not just my body, me. "You have no idea," he whispered, "how beautiful you are when you let go." He wasn't just talking about the way I looked. He meant something deeper. The soft slackness of my face when I wasn't holding up the walls anymore. The way my mouth opened when I moaned his name, without shame. And that night, when he slid inside me, I cried. Not because it hurt, but because it didn't. Because it felt too good. Too real. Too much like love. Afterward, I lay beside him, naked under the thin motel blanket, staring at the water stains on the ceiling. "Does this make us terrible people?" I asked softly. He didn't answer right away. He reached over, took my hand, and kissed the inside of my wrist. "I don't think love is what makes people terrible, but I'm married."
Yeah.
He let the silence stretch. "And?" I prompted, not sure if I wanted the answer. "And maybe you're not really married anymore. Maybe it just looks like you are on paper." That hit me in the stomach. I opened my mouth to argue, but the truth of it caught in my throat. Richard and I hadn't really been married in the way that mattered in years. We lived together. We ate beside each other. We shared bills. But love? Connection?
Desire? Gone.
When I got home the next morning, I carried the motel scent with me like a second skin. My hair smelled of his shampoo. My thighs still ached from how thoroughly he had made me his. I stood in the shower for a long time, water as hot as I could bear it, trying to wash away the guilt, but I didn't really want to. The guilt was proof I was still human. But the pleasure? That was proof I was still alive. Matthew didn't text me every day. There were no good morning messages, no flowers sent to the house. We were careful, quiet, deliberate. He'd reach out maybe once a week. Sometimes a photo, his hand on a steering wheel, bare feet kicked up in a hotel room, the edge of a bed with sunlight pouring across it. Each one came with a message that said everything and nothing. "Wish you were here."
Or,
"Could use the way you laugh right now." And once, "Do you ever think about just leaving?" That one sat on my phone for hours before I replied. "Sometimes." But then what? He didn't answer that one. By late summer, we'd met 5 times. 5 nights in borrowed spaces, where I gave myself over to him completely. Each time it got harder to leave. Each time I found myself driving home slower, the silence of my own life pressing against me like a weight I couldn't shrug off. Richard noticed something. Not the affair itself, but he noticed me humming in the kitchen. Noticed me checking my reflection in mirrors again. One night, he actually reached for me in bed, awkwardly, clumsily, the way he used to in the early years. But when his hands touched me, I felt nothing. No spark. No heat. just pressure and obligation. I let him. I let him touch me, enter me, finish quickly and roll away because it was easier than explaining. But afterward, I curled into a ball, my back to him, and cried into the pillow without making a sound. I wasn't cheating on Richard because I hated him. I was cheating because I missed the version of myself I used to be before the years wore her down. The version Matthew made me feel again. Then one day, Matthew called. Not texted.
Called.
I was in the backyard watering the lavender when my phone rang. "Hey," I said, heart jumping at the sight of his name. "Can I see you?" "When?" "Today." I hesitated. "Is everything okay?" There was a long pause. "No," he said. "But I think it could be if I'm with you." The need in his voice was raw.
Real.
It scared me. I told Richard the first was running errands and would be home late. Then I drove 2 hours south, past the farmlands and fading billboards, to a quiet lakeside cabin he'd rented for the weekend. When I got there, he looked different. Tired. Weathered. "What's going on?" I asked, stepping inside. "My dad's sick," he said. "Pancreatic. Not long left." I reached for him instinctively. He let me hold him. And later, when he kissed me with tears in his eyes, I realized that this, whatever we were doing, had become more than lust. We made love slowly that night, with a kind of aching reverence, like it might be the last time. Afterward, I rested my cheek against his chest and listened to his heart beat steadily beneath my ear. "I'm falling for you," he whispered into the dark. I didn't say it back, but my silence said enough. Because once you've felt something real again, you can't go back to pretending. By the time October rolled around, I could no longer separate the days I lived from the days I wanted. There was a fracture running straight through the middle of me. One side composed of routine, the other of desire. I moved between them like a woman slipping through parallel lives, each version of myself less sure than the one before. Matthew and I had fallen into a rhythm. Quiet, private, pulsing with the kind of anticipation that made my skin feel too tight when I hadn't seen him in a while. Sometimes it was a hotel room in a town neither of us had ever heard of. Other times it was a long walk near the lake. Hands brushing, laughter low, and full of tension that never stayed innocent for long. He never rushed me. Never pressed. But his eyes held questions. His touch said what his mouth didn't dare. How long can you live in two worlds before one of them falls apart? I didn't have an answer. Richard noticed more than he let on. He stopped asking questions, but I saw it in the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching, like he was trying to find the woman he used to know. Like he sensed her slipping away. One evening in mid-October, I came home late from what I claimed was an alumni book club meeting. My blouse smelled faintly of Matthew's cologne, though I'd tried to wash it off. Richard was sitting at the kitchen table, a half-drunk bottle of Cabernet beside him. "You see him again?" he asked without turning around. The words hit me like a slap.
Direct.
Brutal. I froze. "What?" He finally looked at me, his eyes bloodshot but clear. Sad but not surprised. "I'm not a fool, Anna. I know something's changed. I just didn't want to admit it." My hands trembled slightly. I placed my purse down with exaggerated care.
You don't have to say it.
I see it in your face. In the way you walk around like you're halfway somewhere else all the time." He took a slow sip. "Is it someone you work with?"
No.
He waited. It's complicated." He laughed, sharp and tired.
Yeah.
"It always is, isn't it?" I didn't sleep in our bed that night. I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, wondering if what I was doing was bravery or cowardice. I wanted to believe I was chasing life. But maybe I was just running from a truth I hadn't admitted yet. I had already left the marriage long before Matthew ever touched me. Matthew called the next morning, as if he knew something had shifted. "Come with me," he said. "Just for a few days. Let's go somewhere quiet. Just you and me. Somewhere we can breathe." I didn't even ask where.
I just said yes.
We ended up in a rental cabin near Door County. Wood-burning stove, plaid flannel sheets, a screened-in porch that overlooked the edge of the forest where leaves blazed in fire-colored glory. We barely left the bed the first day. He stripped me slowly, murmuring things I didn't know how much I needed to hear until they made me cry. You deserve to be adored. You deserve to be wanted. Every inch of you. I love the way you soften when I touch you. He touched me everywhere.
My jaw.
My ribs. My thighs. The crease where hip meets leg. He kissed the scar on my shoulder I got when I fell off a bike at 11. He worshipped the lines on my stomach like they told stories instead of just showing age. When he moved inside me, it wasn't hurried. It wasn't rough. It was complete. I came apart in his arms, again and again, every time feeling like I was being rewoven into someone new. We talked late into the night, naked beneath the covers, about his mother, his father's fading health, his fear of losing what little family he had left, about how lost he'd felt before he saw me again. I used to think I had time, he said, to find someone, to build something real. But time's not guaranteed. And then I found you. Matthew.
He looked at me.
Really looked. Would you leave him? He asked softly. The question hung in the air like smoke. I wanted to say yes. God, I wanted to. But it wasn't that simple. There's history, I said. 30 years. A life. A house. A name. And what do you have with me? He asked. I didn't hesitate. Myself. I have me again when I'm with you. He kissed me like that answer was enough. Maybe for the moment it was. When I returned home, Richard had already moved into the guest room. We didn't talk about it. He didn't ask where I'd been. The air between us felt like cold soup, thick, quiet, and impossible to swallow. I cooked dinner. He ate in silence. The life we had shared had become something you reheated out of habit. I began seeing Matthew more often. Shorter gaps. Less excuses. We had a standing rhythm now. A coded language. A shared playlist we passed between our phones like a secret. I started wearing perfume again. Started shaving my legs for no one but myself. My laugh returned. My skin glowed. Strangers noticed. But with each meeting, something inside me shifted further away from the woman I'd been. And then one morning, a letter arrived in the mail. Not a bill. Not junk. A handwritten note. From Richard. It simply said, I don't know who you are anymore. And I think maybe neither do you. I hope, for both our sakes, you figure it out soon. I held the paper in shaking hands, heart pounding. Because he was right. I'd become someone else. And I wasn't sure anymore if I could go back. There's a moment, I think, in every affair where the fantasy begins to fray. Where the shimmer starts to fade at the edges and you're left staring at the raw, beating truth of it all. For me, that moment came not in bed or during a fight or even when I read Richard's letter. It came in a grocery store. I was reaching for lemons, distracted, when I looked up and saw Matthew across the produce section, laughing quietly with a woman I didn't recognize. She was maybe in her late 30s, hair pinned in a loose twist, wearing jeans and a cardigan, her hand resting lightly on his forearm as he said something that made her smile. It wasn't what you're thinking. There was nothing scandalous in it. He wasn't cheating. There was no betrayal. But there was a softness in his expression, a lightness I hadn't seen in a while. And for a breathless second I realized, he's not mine. Not really. Not forever. Maybe not even next month. We were two people adrift, who'd found each other at the exact moment our lives cracked open. But that didn't mean we were meant to build something lasting from the rubble. I left the store without buying the lemons. That night, I sat alone in my car parked outside the park we used to take our daughter to when she was still little. I stared at the empty swings moving gently in the wind and wondered who I was supposed to be now. I couldn't go back to being Richard's wife, not fully. That skin didn't fit anymore. But I wasn't sure I could survive the fallout of becoming the woman I'd turned into with Matthew either. That weekend, I asked him to meet me.
No motel. No wine.
Just us. At a quiet coffee shop near the state line where nobody knew us. When he walked in, I saw it in his face immediately. He knew. He sat across from me in the corner booth, eyes searching mine. Don't do it, he said softly. Not here. Not like this. I reached across the table and took his hand. I need to tell you something. And I need to say it all the way. He nodded. I love you, I said. I love what we have, what we are. But I don't know if I can live in the world we'd have to build to make this real. His jaw tensed. He didn't pull away. I've already lost something I can't get back, I continued. And I'm afraid if I try to force this into a shape it doesn't want to take, I'll lose you too. A long silence stretched between us, taut as a violin string. Then he said, So what now? I don't know. But I need space.
Time.
I need to find out if I can be whole without breaking everything. And what if you find out you can't? I blinked back sudden tears. Then I'll know I tried. And maybe you'll still be there. We didn't say goodbye. Not really. We just sat there, holding hands over lukewarm coffee, two people who had loved each other at exactly the wrong time. After that day, we didn't speak for a while. A long while. I focused on rebuilding the life I'd stepped out of, except I didn't try to tape it back exactly the way it had been. Richard and I had the conversation we should have had years ago. It was painful, brutally honest. We agreed to separate.
No yelling. No lawyers yet.
Just space. He moved into a small rental a few towns over. I kept the house. The silence was different now, less suffocating, more introspective. Like breathing under warm water. I started therapy. I began writing again. I joined a local women's hiking group. I got a dog. I learned to drink coffee alone on the back porch in the morning without checking my phone for a message that might not come. And slowly, I began to feel real again. Not the high of being wanted. Not the ache of guilt. Just me. Sometimes Matthew would text. A simple, thinking of you.
Or,
Hope today felt like something good. He never pushed. Never asked. One snowy morning in February, I found myself parked outside that same coffee shop. He walked in, older in the eyes somehow, but still him. Still the man who once taught me how alive my skin could feel under the right hands. We didn't rush into anything.
no declarations.
No plans. Just sat across from each other with quiet smiles and a kind of warmth I hadn't felt in years. Do you think we broke each other? I asked after a while. He reached over and took my hand like it was the most natural thing in the world.
No, he said.
I think we cracked something open. And maybe that's what we both needed.
There were no promises after that.
No dramatic ultimatums or rose-colored dreams. Just two people who'd walked through fire, not entirely intact, but still standing. Still capable of choosing what came next. And that, I think, is what remains after the affair, the truth of who you are when all the illusions burn away. Not the lover. Not the wife. Not the guilty woman. Just you. The part that wants. The part that dares. The part that still hopes. Even after everything.